Well, good morning, everybody. Good morning. Rise and grind. Rise and grind on this. What do they call it? Thank God it's Friday. Yes, thank God it's Friday. I am off today. We got a few inches of snow outside, so I'm glad I'm off. The mailman is home, warm, and secure. No treading through the snow for me today, but we have stuff to talk about, as always. The state of the Cowboys. You know that Deion Sanders is in the picture. Um, Listen, I've had live streams, I've had videos stating why I think the culture change to Deion would be greatly um, needed. Okay, that again, nobody's saying that means winning. I've heard arguments to the contrary. But this video here, we're going to talk about, and I'm going to do multiple videos today, so just make sure you have your bell notifications on. Um, Now you're starting to hear. I'm not saying these men are right or wrong. I totally get how it works. I have a lot of respect for 105.3 The Fan. I like Sean Sharif. I think he's very good at his job. I like Bobby Belt. I think he's just a very smart individual, but he's opinionated, as we all are. That's what we get paid to do. But now we're starting to hear the rumblings of what was going on with Mike McCarthy. Now I'm going to play, I don't know how long it's going to be. I'm going to jump right into it. This was from yesterday morning. This video is just going to cover the Mike McCarthy era. And really, it was bad from the beginning. Now, I like Mike McCarthy, but we've heard from guys I trust. I always bring them up. Brian brought us. Don't always agree. The sun doesn't rise and set with Brian. It don't. But he is a Super Bowl winning scout with the Green Bay Packers. I do value, I take information from people I trust. Some people are just clickbaiters. It is what it is. And Brian has always had a problem with McCarthy and his work ethic. Um, Listen, when you're a head coach of the NFL, family takes a back seat. If you saw my Michael Irvin video from the other day, he tells you if you win on the field, everything takes care of itself. A lot, and now McCarthy is a winning coach as well. I think he was put in a tough spot. Surprise, surprise, by the Cowboys. I think he was put in a tough spot. But I'm going to listen to Bobby and the tensions between McCarthy, Dan Quinn, Kellen Moore, Mari Cooper. We're going to listen to it. I'm going to stop the video. I'm going to try not to let this be too long of a video. We'll get in, we'll get out. If you didn't see it already, we're going to go over it. So let's dig right in here. We'll see exactly how long I get before I stop.
In that process, Doug Nussmeier gets bumped up to quarterbacks coach with Kellen, or the previous year had been bumped up to quarterbacks coach, and he gets retained as part of that because just continuity's sake, the relationship that exists with Dak. They run into problems really quickly. The COVID era had been, you consistently would hear Mike and other people talk about, like, I was really only here for 4 years, or really this is year 4 here because year 1 didn't really count.
Yeah.
It was tough for a lot of people to just accept that because it's like, well, it's also year 1 for Ron Rivera and things have gotten better in Washington this year. Or, oh, this has worked out. Why is this Zoom era, Microsoft Teams meeting there so difficult for you guys specifically? And I think it raised questions of, obviously there were challenges that existed, but were these challenges that existed amplified by the fact that you hired a bunch of coaches that people wondered if they should have been in the NFL anymore anyway? And did you make the right calls there and the right decisions? So August, they roll around into training camp, their weird modified training camp, and there's early tension between, I think, Kellen and Mike, because Mike has his own ideas about what he wants to do. Philosophically, they're not the same guy at all. They're not the same coach. And I think Mike had said previously he was never going to give up, offensive play calling again. So coming in here doing that was not an evolution of just, I've changed my mind again. He just wasn't getting play calling at the time, but he still wanted to influence it. And he still.
Just to recap. Remember, Mike McCarthy takes over literally the year COVID hits. The year prior, Kellen Moore, although, again, success in the playoffs is fleeting. I think it starts at the top when it comes to that. All those decisions that are made by your general manager and the meddling, I think that what ultimately stops you from winning. But just to reset, what he's talking about is basically Kellen Moore had a dynamic offense, okay, but they didn't win. It slowed down in the playoffs. So that's what they're talking about. Now hence McCarthy comes in, takes over, and let's listen in.
Wanted to. We had that discussion when we said, if he comes back, is he going to have play calling? And if he has play calling, how much are they going to trust that he's going to keep his hands off of it? Because I think that was a tension point for Kellen Moore to feel like, dude, you need to give me some space to do the things that we want to do here. All right. I know philosophically you don't agree with some things, but you need to give me autonomy. And so I think that created some natural tension where Kellen didn't always feel like he had the autonomy that he needed to have.
And real quick, I do think this is one of the problems here. Like, when you're bringing in, you can't just, like, when we did this show, Sean and I met like 2 days prior to doing the show.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked, but I mean, not at first. Like, at first, it was like it was like the first. I remember the first show. It was very like it was awkward. Like we didn't know how to play off each other yet.
Yeah,
that is one problem here. Like they want to force somebody on the coach.
Yeah.
And make it work out of thin air. It just doesn't happen.
I agree. I don't blame Mike for being like,
Yeah, I don't blame Mike for that either. It's like you hire a coach, but you don't want them to be able to totally organically change. Now, I get it. And my response to this is Mike McCarthy made a lot of bad choices. I think Bobby talks about that. But when he came in, he wanted to hire all of his buddies, and I believe he does talk about it. But so, I just don't want to just run there. I want to get my opinion on this. He hires his buddies, and a lot of coaches do, because you're comfortable with that. So let's listen in.
you're the coordinator, but I'm not going to just blindly give you all the power. I'm the head coach.
Right, but the ultimate authority in terms of just what gets done here is going to be the general manager. And so if the general manager has somebody in charge of play calling, well, Mike, you're overstepping bounds now. You're overstepping directives at this point. And you understood the terms of it when you got here. You wanted to get here under certain terms. I will say, by the way, as much as it's been laughed off or pushed off, I didn't watch every play of the 2019 season that was made there. There were a couple people that with the Cowboys that didn't sit well with. Not like clearly.
Well, that's
Not
your
a-
fault for believing it.
Not everyone laughed it off.
Not believing it. It's they felt a little bit like, understand it's a joke. You're kind of making a mockery of this, though, on your very first time talking to people. We don't love that. And so I think that didn't necessarily set a great.
Yeah, remember when Tom Pelissero went to McCarthy's house and, his year off from coaching, he that was all lies. Tom Pelissero is not that it was all lies, but he wasn't studying every play like McCarthy said. Basically, I questioned Dallas's interview process. If you could just make up shit left and right, I would be like, hey, how it works, unfortunately, you can't say, well, just look at my track record. I'm a winner. Hire me. You got to sell every time. Sell, sell, sell. And a lot of that was, he said McCarthy had said that he watched every play, in 2019 of the Cowboys season. That was a lie. It was.
Great tone. September rolls around. They are getting run in some of these games. Even the first game they won against Atlanta, that was one where
The watermelon kick.
That was the watermelon kick, and they were down big. I mean, they were very close to being 0-4 to start the season. And not just 0-4, giving up historic numbers on defense, which was Mike Nolan, and was a Mike Nolan, was a Mike McCarthy decision, a Mike McCarthy hire. You started hearing about some instability, specifically after Dak went down. Because when Dak went down with the injury, that's when Jane's report comes out in October that says 2 separate players tell her coaching staff's bad. Just, it's not good. And there were some issues keeping everybody under control, especially once Dak was out and rehabbing, because Dak is such an important figure in the locker room and helping settle everything. It felt like there was a little bit of control issues. There were a lot of issues with Everson Griffin at the time. There were a lot of issues with Aldon Smith at the time. Those were sincere problems that they felt like there was a void of, just like, where's the leadership here? Who's really in charge? Who's running things? And it got to the point that, we're not going to play the clip, but I'll say it. There was the very famous Hayden Hurst clip with Dak Prescott, where he approaches him after the game, mic'd up, and he says, you know, hey, I respect what you said about mental health, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Not blah, 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 but you know what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah, blah, blah,
The
blah.
very cut before that, the Atlanta Falcons unintentionally left on the editing room floor. In fact, you know what? We will play it. I don't care, because I don't want people to think I'm just making up this cut. The Falcons accidentally left on the editing room floor, or didn't leave on the editing room floor, Brandon Carr, a former teammate of Hayden Hurst, going up and talking to him afterwards, where Brandon Carr, as you will hear in this clip, and it's a little difficult here, so I'm going to tell you what he says in advance, where he's catching up with Hayden Hurst, and he says, the coaches are S. Play it, Peyton. This is clip 1.
What's up, boy? So good to see you, man. Likewise. How you doing? I'm trying to hang in there. I'm like the coaches. You know, I love it, man. Having a good time, bro. Good to see you, man.
And they couldn't, the Falcons, they didn't hear what was said. They heard S word, but there was, I don't know. Okay, well, we got to bleep that. I'm not sure what else was said. It was something, though, as soon as attention was brought to that, people kind of circled back. That disappeared from the Falcons website. I don't think that mic'd up segment exists on the Falcons website anymore. You can find it on YouTube repurposed, but it doesn't exist there anymore. So clearly there was some discontent in the locker room with the way the coaching staff was being handled. All of that leads to also that you've got the issue in November when Andy Dalton gets knocked down in Washington. And nobody replies to John Bostic and what he did. There's some sense from people in the Cowboys, I think, that's a leadership issue. That's young players out there, but you guys have clearly, this coaching staff has not set the right.
I remember that. I do remember that. Remember, nobody came to the defense of Andy Dalton, and I remember watching the game. I might have been streaming it with Mark, saying, "What the hell?" Maybe I don't know. I lose track. Maybe I was here, but I don't think so. It's like, is there any accountability? The one thing you can see with this team this year, there was a lot of, in my opinion, there was a lot of accountability. That's why I like Brock Hoffman on this team. You don't take any shit. Sometimes you'll take a bad penalty, but that's fine. Shit needs to be checked.
Right tone or culture or anything else. A lot of these, I think, can be explained ways. First year, lack of communication, things like that. But it sets the tone for them. They get into 2021, and I think a lot of people at the Cowboys felt like, all right, Mike, we did it your way with some of these staff hires. Some of this is going to be our recommendation now, because this didn't work out the way it needed to. The Cowboys brass really pushes for Dan Quinn, not Mike McCarthy. That's a hire that Mike McCarthy, to be clear, gets along with Dan Quinn, likes Dan Quinn. Those are all true things. Doesn't dislike Dan Quinn at all. Dan Quinn was a figure that, like when we talk about the Jason Witten thing here, Dan Quinn was a big figure hanging over Mike McCarthy's shoulder for 3 years. Yeah. That was not media narrative.
Now, I just want to explain something. Everybody wants to say meddling is bad. Dallas, and listen, maybe that's why they can't win a Super Bowl or win, not even a Super Bowl. Maybe that's why they can't go on any extended playoff run. I mean, I don't know. But I actually like that Dallas will not just close their eyes and let a ship just go and sink. I like the fact that my organization is seeing the pulse. I mean, they're not going to tell the media. That's my issue with 105.3 The Fan. Bobby was told all this back at the time, and because his source doesn't want it to get out, he has to sit on it. And it happens all the time. I mean, I heard Broadus say, there was a lot of times when he worked for DallasCowboys.com, and they had a story 3 days before Dallas is good for letting the major networks guys, Adam Schefter, all those guys, break it, mainly in part because they got to deal with these. It's all about money. They don't really care. You know what I mean? It's all about money. So making friendships with the big wigs. So it is what it is. I don't have a problem with Dallas stepping in and telling McCarthy, listen, man, Mike Nolan stinks. I mean, listen, we did end up winning 12 games that next year. You know what I'm saying? We won 3 straight 12 games. So you have to give them credit for winning regular season games. But we got to find out why we can't go on any sort of sustain. I believe the roster was flawed, but I can't say that every year.
That was a very real thing that Mike McCarthy.
Remember when McCarthy called the Rich Eisen show?
Yeah.
But that was really bad by Jerry. Jerry was like acting
Senior
like
Bowl.
Dan Quinn could just take over the job.
Yeah, and that was Senior Bowl, I think the year after. It was after his first year here, where he said, yeah, Dan would be a great coach of the Dallas Cowboys. But that's something where the Cowboys said, look, your defensive coordinator, Buddy Hire, that the Saints were apparently happy letting leave as their linebackers coach, that didn't work out. So you're taking on Dan Quinn. I don't care if that's uncomfortable for you. We're trying to win games.
That was a great move by the Cowboys.
And so I think
not McCarthy.
That became I know that became a tension issue that Mike expressed to people, where he would say that he was hearing all that noise and that was distracting for him, and that he didn't like necessarily having somebody of Dan Quinn's prominence who could easily take over his job being oversold. I think that existed with Zimmer. I think when Zimmer got hired here, I don't know how much Mike loved that idea. Where that
Zimmer was not his call.
No, and you can hear Zimmer in some of the interviews this offseason.
Do you know who Mike wanted?
No, well, I don't know.
Did they go to D.C.?
I don't think that he... I think that there's somebody on staff he probably could have elevated. That I don't know. I can't say with certainty who he would have wanted.
Because it sounds like him and Zim get along now.
Yeah, and again, I don't think he has any personal issues with these guys. I think it's more just what they represent to his own job.
Sure.
Well, that created a tension point when coupled with Kellen Moore. There's 2 of his coordinators now that essentially run both sides of the ball. He's a CEO, just kind of supposed to oversee culture, and he's honestly, a lot of people feel like too distracted to oversee culture.
And I would tell my Eagle fans, if you're watching this kind of reminds me of the setup in Philly. Difference is, because you got Nick Sirianni, he didn't want Kellen Moore. I mean, there's been a lot. Again, I know Drew makes a lot of comments about certain things. It's well known the issues that in order for Sirianni to stay there, he had to bow down to the front office with analytics and letting them be involved in play calling. Not so much play calling, but game planning. I mean, again, Doug Peterson wanted no part of that. Now, Eagles have a lot of talent, especially on the offensive line. This last year's draft was a home run for them. So they're rolling. Yeah, it's a bad time to criticize, but that's kind of what Sirianni is. And Sirianni is an example, love or hate Dracula. And most of the Eagle fans love him because they love that attitude that he brings. You know, not no nonsense, but F everybody outside of our building. And that's kind of cool. When you're winning, when you're losing, it goes kind of south. And that's why you see what you see or hear what you hear locally. When and if they lose a playoff game, they're going to throw him under the bus. Now, I think he's here. I mean, he's got way too many wins. But what I would tell people is, at what point do you sacrifice the wins for a championship? Because remember, it was Dougie P who won a Super Bowl. Again, Sirianni's doing a hell of a job racking the wins up, so I can't argue.
He's too distracted by his assistant coaches to effectively oversee what's happening with the culture here, and he's too hyper aware of what's being discussed. He has people in his circle that will report back to him on what's being said in the media and what the speculation is and what those things that exist. And that's not a healthy place to be. Now, you can make the argument, as I'm sure a lot of people would, well, that's the front office's fault for putting him in that unhealthy position. Regardless of that, he agreed to the terms of the deal, understanding that's what the offensive coordinator position was, and then the other stuff he was given autonomy over, he really didn't handle very well in terms of making those coaching hires.
But isn't all this further the discussion that the organization is not going to be able to get the coach that we want because they operate in this way where they're like, no, you're taking this, you're taking that. It's the same thing.
That's a hell of a point.
Same thing with Witten. Same thing with Garrett, with Wade Phillips. Why would you want to coach here?
I mean, it's the Dallas Cowboys. Like, at the end of the day, you can say whatever you want. It is still the Dallas Cowboys. And I know you're asking these questions that are fun debate topics. The reality is it's the Dallas Cowboys. People want to coach here, regardless of what the terms are oftentimes. I mean, most coaches want to coach here. There are big-name coaches now who there's chatter about how they think. It's like the Sean Payton thing. Sean Payton knew how things operated here. Yeah. Sean Payton wants to run things all his way, knows he would not be able to do that in Dallas, and still wanted to be here. Because it's the Dallas Cowboys and it matters. There's an aura that exists here. The Quinn issue became something where there's just this natural tension that exists to the point where Dan Quinn had intimated people, it was my understanding, had intimated to people after a year or two, was just like, should I go? Like this feels uncomfortable for everybody. Should I just go? But I think he liked being here in Dallas. I think he liked working with Mike McCarthy on stuff outside of just that unusual factor. Now, over the course of that season, the 21 season, Mike McCarthy really sours on Amari Cooper. And I think he felt like Amari Cooper was probably one of the, in fact, definitely, he felt like Amari Cooper was one of the bad apples who was spoiling the locker room for him. That he felt like Cooper and a couple other players who I've heard names, but not consistently enough to comfortably say. I've heard consistently Cooper was one that he thought was spoiling the locker for him.
In what regard, what way? Because we just hear, free thinker, there's the COVID aspect. It was practicing.
And Mike McCarthy was very frustrated that he would never practice. That was something that irritated him, that he'd show up for game day, but he wouldn't practice necessarily because of bumps and bruises and different things like that. The Cooper thing, it wasn't like there was, hey, I've caught you talking about this or I've heard you talking about this. He just knew that he had natural tension with Amari, as a lot of people did, because Amari's a really smart guy and it's like, you need to explain the logic to me of everything.
Yes.
And a lot of people view that as defiance. And it caused some issues with Sanjay Law, the old receivers coach, that way.
Sanjay Law.
And that was a tense point. In fact, in 2019, when he played those 3 snaps against the Jets and went out, that was a big problem for the Cowboys, where they were like,
I agree.
Your relationship with your receivers coach can't be so bad that there's a lack of communication to even tell us how hurt you are or to how much this is bugging you. That's a problem, which they're right. That they couldn't get to that point. But Mike McCarthy, I think, always felt like Amari Cooper was part of things that would leak out about people being upset. And so because that a lot of times there wasn't anything that definitively pointed that. It was an assumption. He just assumed that was one of the people that was really stirring things up for him. And that feedback, that critical feedback of Amari Cooper to the front office about his practice habits, about other, how much does he care, that carried over to, I think, the front office. And that influenced their opinions on him to where when they traded Amari Cooper, there were a lot of people in the locker room who felt like this is Mike. This is Mike, not necessarily pulling the trigger, but Mike is the one who was in their ear that led to them doing this. And it caused some frustration for a lot of guys. Like, I talked directly to players who had said that they were frustrated, that they felt like Mike, after the trade, walked around kind of like, yeah, that's crazy that we traded Amari. I don't know why they did it either.
A little disingenuous.
And some guy, that didn't sit well with some players, where they felt like,
you know why.
If you feel that way, fine, feel that way. But like, own it when it happens.
Right.
Don't walk away from
Stand up
it.
and say, yo, we had to move on.
That, again, that's another tension point where it's like, okay, you seem paranoid about our assistant coaches. You seem paranoid about guys in the locker.
There, everybody. Basically, going back to the Amari Cooper situation, to this day, we're still getting calls, and I want to hear from everybody. Wade, I want to know what you think. I want to know with Ultra Cowboy. I want to know what Brad thinks. I want to know, Brad Harris. Let me know what you think. Because I know we all hammered Jerry Jones, Stephen Jones about the Amari Cooper trade. But when you have your coach, Mike McCarthy, saying he must go, he's messing up my locker room, now you start to look at things differently. My only thing is the fact that all this was going on and it wasn't brought out to light. I'm actually impressed. I was actually impressed. I understand why 105.3 or Bobby couldn't come out. I get it. It's just, it totally changes my mindset when it comes to Mike McCarthy. Now, I was ready to move on from Mike after the playoff game. I thought it ran its course for a lot of these reasons that we don't know that we now do know. So let me know what you think. Is Mike McCarthy rightly scapegoated? Or do you think the organization is just a problem? It's never going to change. It starts at the top. I think it's all true. But that's it for this video. Let me know your opinions. But it's kind of interesting that this was, I mean, it's really impressive that they won 3 straight 12-win seasons amongst all this, because that tells you one thing. There is a base level of talent that can just win some games. So, all right, I got another video coming up later this afternoon. This is going to piggyback off of this video talking about the coaching search. And yes, Ben Johnson, Kellen Moore, and we'll talk about Deion. But always, always, always remember.
How about them Cowboys? Yeah!
Late.